Some people don't ruin your life in one moment. They do it slowly. So slowly, you don't even notice it happening. They smile with you, sit with you, talk like they care. But behind all that, they are changing the way you think, the way you feel, and eventually, the way you see yourself. And the most dangerous part, you might be calling them friends. Today, I'm going to show you 3 types of people you should never keep in your life. Not because they are obvious enemies, but because they don't look like enemies at all. At first, it never feels dangerous. In fact, it feels like the exact opposite. You meet someone who seems to understand you in a way others don't. They listen closely, they remember small details, they say things that make you feel seen. It's subtle but powerful. You feel comfortable around them quickly, maybe even unusually fast. They know what to say, when to say it, and how to make you feel valued. It feels rare. It feels genuine. And that's exactly why it works. In the beginning, their attention feels like care. They check in on you often, ask how you're doing, and seem invested in your life. They notice your moods, your habits, your patterns. You might even think, finally, someone who really gets me. But what you don't notice is how closely they're studying you, not to support you, but to understand how to influence you later. The shift is never sudden. It's gradual, almost invisible, a small comment here and there, a question that makes you pause. Are you sure that's what happened? I think you're remembering it wrong. At first, you brush it off. Everyone misunderstands things sometimes, but then it happens again and again, and slowly you begin to second-guess yourself. You start replaying conversations in your head. You wonder if you overreacted, if you misunderstood, if maybe they're right. And that's where the control begins. Not through force, not through fear, but through confusion. Because once a person begins to doubt their own perception, they become easier to guide, easier to influence, easier to control. They don't tell you what to think directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they guide your thoughts in a way that feels like your own idea. They ask leading questions, plant small doubts, and let your mind do the rest. It feels natural, like you're coming to your own conclusions, but those conclusions were carefully shaped. Sometimes they'll make you feel guilty for things you didn't do. They'll say things like, "I guess I just care more than you do," or "I didn't expect this from you." And suddenly you're apologizing even when you're not sure what you did wrong. You just don't want to lose the connection. You don't want to hurt them, and they know that. What makes this even more confusing is that they're not always like this. There are moments when they're kind again, supportive again, warm again. Just when you start to feel distant or unsure, they pull you back in with the same charm that drew you in from the start. And that contrast keeps you hooked. You start chasing the good version of them, trying to fix whatever went wrong, trying to get back to how things were in the beginning. But the beginning was never real. It was a setup. Over time, you notice changes in yourself. You hesitate before speaking. You overthink simple decisions. You seek their approval more than you used to. You become careful, almost cautious around them. Not because they've clearly threatened you, but because something inside you feels unsettled. You just can't explain it. And that's the most dangerous part. There are no visible scars, no obvious damage. From the outside, everything looks normal, maybe even perfect. But inside, you feel smaller, less certain, less confident in your own thoughts. You start relying on them to confirm what's real and what's not. At some point, you might try to bring it up. You might say, "I feel like something is off," or "Sometimes I feel confused after we talk." And instead of understanding, they turn it back on you. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. You always do this. And suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their behavior. It's about your reaction. You leave that conversation feeling even worse. Not only confused, but now also guilty. Like you caused a problem where there wasn't one. So the next time you feel something is wrong, you stay quiet. You ignore it. You suppress it. Because it feels easier than being made to feel like the problem again. This pattern repeats until you don't even trust your own feelings anymore. You rely on them to tell you what's right, what's wrong, what's real. And that's when the control is complete. Not because they forced you into it, but because you slowly gave away your sense of certainty. But deep down, something never fully agrees with it. There's always a small voice, quiet but persistent, telling you that something isn't right. You might ignore it for a while, but it doesn't disappear. It shows up in moments of silence, in late-night thoughts, in that uneasy feeling you can't quite explain. And one day, something small happens. Maybe they contradict themselves. Maybe they deny something you clearly remember. Maybe they push a little too far. And for a moment, everything becomes clear. Not fully, not all at once, but enough to make you pause and think, wait, this doesn't make sense. That moment matters more than anything, because it's the first crack in the illusion. From there, awareness begins. You start observing instead of reacting. You notice patterns instead of isolated incidents. You pay attention not just to what they say, but how it makes you feel. And slowly, you begin to separate their voice from your own. You realize that clarity doesn't come from them. It comes from within you. And the more you trust that, the stronger you become. Dealing with this kind of person doesn't require drama or confrontation. It requires awareness and boundaries. It means not explaining yourself endlessly just to be understood. It means not accepting guilt that doesn't belong to you. It means stepping back when something feels wrong instead of leaning in to fix it. At first, setting boundaries feels uncomfortable. You might feel rude, distant, even guilty. But that feeling doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something new, something necessary. And when they notice the change, they might push back. They might try harder to pull you in, to confuse you again, to make you question your decision. That's when it becomes even more important to stay grounded. Not in what they say, but in what you've observed, what you felt, what you now understand. Because the truth is, you don't need to prove anything to them. You don't need their agreement to trust your own experience. You don't need their validation to know what feels right and what does. Walking away doesn't always mean physically leaving. Sometimes it means emotionally detaching, not reacting the same way, not engaging in the same patterns, not giving them the same access to your thoughts and feelings. And slowly, as you create that distance, something begins to return. Your clarity, your confidence, your sense of self. You start making decisions without second-guessing every step. You speak without overanalyzing every word. You feel more like yourself again, not because anything external changed, but because you stopped letting someone else define your internal world. And in that process, you learn something important, not just about them, but about yourself, that your perception matters, that your feelings are valid, that your inner voice, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard. Because the moment you stop doubting yourself unnecessarily is the moment their control begins to fade. At first, it feels like kindness. You meet someone who seems to be going through a lot, and naturally you want to help. They open up quickly, sharing their struggles, their disappointments, their pain. There's something in their tone that pulls you in. It feels real, emotional, almost heavy. You listen, you nod, you try to understand. And in that moment, it feels like the right thing to do. They tell you about how people have treated them unfairly, how nothing ever seems to work out, how every situation somehow turns against them. You hear about friends who betrayed them, family who misunderstood them, colleagues who took advantage of them. It's a long list, and every story has the same pattern. They were wronged. They were hurt. They were left alone to deal with it. At first, you don't question it. Why would you? Everyone has difficult phases. Everyone needs someone to listen sometimes. So you stay present. You offer advice when they ask for it, and even when they don't. You try to lift their mood, suggest solutions, encourage them to see things differently. And for a moment, it feels like you're making a difference. But then something strange happens. The next day, or maybe a few days later, the cycle repeats. A new problem, a new story, a new situation where once again they are the victim. And again, you listen. Again, you try to help. Again, nothing changes. Over time, you start noticing that your advice doesn't go anywhere. It's not that they disagree with you openly. In fact, sometimes they nod, they say you're right, they even thank you. But when the same type of situation comes back, it's as if the previous conversation never happened. The same complaints, the same emotions, the same sense of helplessness. It begins to feel like you're talking in circles, like you're pouring energy into something that never fills up. You start to feel tired after conversations with them, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, as if something inside you is being drained slowly. What makes it harder is that they don't appear harmful. They're not aggressive. They're not controlling in an obvious way. They just seem overwhelmed. And because of that, you hesitate to pull back. You tell yourself, they're going through a lot, I should be there for them. And that thought keeps you engaged, even when it starts to cost you your peace. Then come the subtle moments that shift everything. One day, you're busy. You can't respond right away, or you don't have the energy to listen deeply. So you say something simple like, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. And suddenly, their tone changes. I guess I know who really cares. It's fine, I'll just deal with it myself like always. I didn't expect this from you. The words are not loud, but they land heavily. You feel it immediately. Guilt, pressure, a quiet sense that you've done something wrong, even though logically you know you haven't. So you go back, you apologize, you make time, you listen again. And without realizing it, a pattern forms. They express pain. You respond with care. They respond with guilt if you step back. You return out of responsibility. It becomes a loop, and in that loop, your role slowly shifts. You're no longer just a friend or a listener. You become a constant source of emotional support, someone they rely on not just occasionally, but continuously. The problem is not that they have struggles. Everyone does. The problem is that they never take ownership of anything in their life. There's always someone else to blame, something else at fault, a reason why nothing can change. And because of that, your support doesn't lead to growth. It leads to dependency. You begin to notice how your own emotions are affected. You feel heavier after talking to them. Your mood shifts. Your energy drops. You start anticipating their messages, not with excitement, but with a quiet sense of exhaustion. Still, you hesitate to create distance, because a part of you worries, what if they really need me? That thought keeps you connected longer than you should be. But there's a difference between being there for someone and being responsible for them. One supports growth, the other enables stagnation. And the line between the two is often blurred by emotion. There comes a moment when you start questioning things, not in a harsh way, but in a reflective way. You think about how often things improve for them, how often they take action based on your conversations, how often they move forward instead of repeating the same cycle. And the answer becomes clear, even if you don't want to admit it. Very little changes. That realization is uncomfortable, not because it makes them look bad, but because it forces you to rethink your role. It makes you see that your presence, while well-intentioned, may not actually be helping in the way you believed. You start noticing that they rarely ask about you, rarely check how you're doing, and even when they do, the conversation quickly shifts back to them, their problems, their feelings, their struggles. It's not balanced. And relationships that are not balanced, no matter how emotional they seem, eventually become draining. At some point, you feel the need to step back, not out of anger, but out of necessity. You realize that continuing like this is not sustainable, so you begin to respond a little differently. You listen, but not as deeply. You care, but with limits. You offer support, but you don't absorb everything. And that's when you see the reaction more clearly. They may become distant, or more emotional, or even slightly accusatory, because the dynamic is changing. You are no longer playing the role they became comfortable with. And that shift reveals something important. If your absence creates guilt instead of understanding, then the connection was not as healthy as it seemed. Dealing with this kind of person doesn't mean abandoning them completely. It means adjusting your level of involvement. It means being kind without overextending yourself. It means recognizing that you can support someone, but you cannot live their life for them. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is say, "I care about you, but I think you need to take steps for yourself too," and then allowing space for that to happen. That space may feel uncomfortable at first. You might feel like you're doing less than you should, but over time, you begin to notice a shift within yourself. Your energy starts to return. Your mind feels lighter. Your conversations feel more balanced. And most importantly, you no longer feel responsible for emotions that are not yours. You begin to understand that compassion does not mean constant availability, that empathy does not require self-sacrifice, that being a good person does not mean ignoring your own limits. Because when you constantly give without boundaries, you don't just lose energy, you lose yourself in the process. And the truth is, real help does not create dependency. It encourages responsibility. It supports growth. It allows the other person to stand on their own, even if it takes time. Not everyone is ready for that. Some people are more comfortable staying in the role of the victim because it protects them from facing difficult truths or making uncomfortable changes. And that's something you cannot control. What you can control is how much of yourself you give, how you respond, and where you draw the line. You can still be kind. You can still listen. You can still care. But you don't have to carry what was never yours to carry. And once you understand that, something shifts inside you. You stop feeling guilty for needing space. You stop feeling responsible for fixing everything. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure for someone else. And in that clarity, you find a healthier way to connect with people. One that includes care, but also balance. One that includes empathy, but also self-respect. Because in the end, protecting your peace is not a rejection of others. It is a recognition that your well-being matters too. At first, there is nothing about them that feels dangerous. In fact, they seem like the kind of person everyone wants to be around. They walk into a room and naturally draw attention, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that feels effortless. They know how to speak, how to joke, how to carry themselves with confidence. People listen when they talk. People laugh when they smile. And when they give you attention, it feels like you've been chosen. Being around them feels exciting. Conversations are smooth, engaging, even inspiring. They talk about goals, success, growth, and they seem to have everything figured out. You find yourself admiring them, maybe even looking up to them a little. It feels like being close to them might push you forward in life, like their energy might somehow elevate yours. At first, everything feels positive. They compliment you, acknowledge your strengths, include you in conversations. You feel seen, appreciated, part of something meaningful. And because of that, you naturally open up. You share your thoughts, your plans, your insecurities. You trust them, not because they asked for it directly, but because they made it feel safe. But then, very subtly, things begin to shift. It starts with small comments, almost unnoticeable at first. A joke that feels slightly off. A compliment that carries a hidden edge. "You're doing good, I didn't expect that from you." They smile when they say it, so you smile back. You tell yourself it's harmless, maybe even motivating, but something about it stays in your mind longer than it should. Then it happens again in a different way. You share an idea, something you're excited about. They nod, listen, and then respond with something like, "That's interesting, but have you thought about how it might not work?" The tone is calm, almost helpful, but the effect is different. Instead of feeling encouraged, you feel uncertain. Not completely discouraged, just slightly pulled back. These moments don't seem like much on their own. In fact, if you tried to explain them to someone else, it might sound insignificant. But the impact is cumulative. It builds slowly, piece by piece, until you start noticing a pattern. Around them, you begin to hesitate more. You think twice before sharing ideas. You filter your words, adjust your tone, second-guess your thoughts. Not because they directly told you to, but because something in their presence makes you feel like you need to be careful. And the confusing part is that they're not always like this. There are moments when they lift you up again. They praise your work, support your decisions, include you in their plans. Just when you begin to question your feelings, they remind you of why you liked them in the first place. And that contrast keeps you engaged. It creates a kind of emotional imbalance where you keep trying to stay in their good books, even without realizing it. Slowly, you begin to measure yourself through their reactions. If they approve, you feel confident. If they dismiss something, you feel uncertain. If they praise you, you feel validated. Without noticing it, their opinion starts carrying more weight than your own. And that's where the real influence begins. They don't need to control you directly. They don't need to tell you what to do. Because once you start seeking their approval, you begin adjusting yourself automatically. You align your behavior, your thoughts, even your goals, just to stay in that space where they seem to accept you. At times, they might position themselves as someone who is simply being honest. They might say, "I'm just telling you the truth," or "I say this because I want you to improve." And while honesty is valuable, the way it is delivered matters. Genuine honesty builds you. It challenges you, but also supports you. What they offer feels different. It chips away at your confidence rather than strengthening it. The more time you spend around them, the more you notice the emotional pattern. You feel good when you're validated, but that feeling is temporary. It depends on them. It comes and goes based on how they respond to you. And when it's gone, you feel slightly off balance again. You might start comparing yourself more, not just to them, but to others around you. You feel like you need to prove something, even when no one clearly asked you to. You push yourself, not from a place of growth, but from a place of quiet pressure. And yet from the outside, everything looks fine. They're still charming, still respected, still admired. No one else seems to notice what you're feeling, and that makes it even harder to trust your own experience. You might think, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm overthinking, and that thought keeps you in the same cycle longer than you should be. But there comes a point where the feeling becomes too consistent to ignore. You start noticing how you feel after spending time with them. Not during, when everything is active and engaging, but after, when things are quiet. You feel drained. You feel slightly inadequate. You feel like you're not doing enough, not being enough. And that feeling doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from repeated, subtle interactions that slowly reshape how you see yourself. That realization is uncomfortable, but important, because it shifts your focus from their words to your internal state. You begin to understand that it's not about what they say on the surface, but about the impact it has on you over time. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Dealing with this kind of person requires a different kind of awareness. It's not about confronting every comment or proving them wrong. It's about stepping back and reclaiming your own sense of value. It means paying attention to how you feel, not just what is being said. It means recognizing that confidence built on someone else's approval is not stable. And it means slowly reducing the influence they have over your self-perception. At first, this might feel difficult. You might still find yourself reacting internally to their words, still seeking that validation. But awareness changes the dynamic. It creates a space between what they say and how you respond to it. In that space, you begin to rebuild something important: your own voice. You start trusting your thoughts again, valuing your ideas without needing immediate approval, feeling confident in your direction, even if no one praises it. And as that grows, their influence naturally weakens. You may also begin to create distance, not in a dramatic way, but in a calm, intentional way. You engage less in conversations that leave you feeling small. You stop sharing things that feel important to you with someone who doesn't handle them with care. You choose your interactions more consciously. And in doing so, you notice a shift. You feel lighter. more stable, more grounded in who you are. Because your sense of self is no longer tied to someone else's reactions. That doesn't mean they are entirely bad or that every moment with them is negative. It simply means that the dynamic between you and them is not healthy for your growth. And recognizing that is not judgment, it is clarity. You don't need to prove anything to them. You don't need to compete for their approval. You don't need to shrink to fit into their space. Because the right people don't make you feel like you need to earn your worth repeatedly. They reflect it back to you in a way that feels steady and genuine. And once you experience that difference, even briefly, you understand how important it is. You understand that real confidence is not built through comparison or subtle criticism, but through support, respect, and honesty that uplifts rather than diminishes. And most importantly, you realize that protecting your sense of self is not something you negotiate. It is something you maintain, quietly and consistently, by choosing where you invest your time, your energy, and your trust. This message is not about labeling people or judging others harshly. Every human being has flaws, struggles, and moments of weakness. The goal is not to hate, cancel, or isolate others. The goal is awareness, to recognize unhealthy patterns, protect your mental and emotional well-being, and build relationships based on respect, honesty, and balance. From a universal, moral perspective shared across cultures and faiths. Be fair, be compassionate, but never allow yourself to be harmed repeatedly in the name of kindness. Because taking care of yourself is not selfish, it's necessary